what is it that you two do?
We're computer software engineers.
Let's talk about the final few episodes of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We watched episodes 1 through 4 last week, and we watched episodes 5 through 8 this week. Patrick Klepek, let's just start overall in one sentence or less. Do you think people should finish watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a wonderful show, start to finish. If we don't get any more, I'll be sad. But it tells a really complete, interesting story and ends on a really cool note.
I agree. I think the show is a lot of fun. Some really cool sequences, some great chemistry between the leads. Worth checking out if you have the chance. Let's talk about some of the specific stuff that happened during these episodes. First of all, before we get to the very ending, which obviously we will discuss, anything that you want to call out as something praiseworthy during these last 4 episodes? I will say this. I really liked the couples therapy episode, and I think that I would actually argue that their couples therapist, even though she was, a little bit of an oblivious white person, I'll just say, with all these various ethnic sort of trinkets around her.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she was actually pretty decent as a couples therapist. I'm gonna put that out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched a bunch of therapy related content recently. I did a rewatch of The Sopranos not too long ago. I rewatched this movie called You Hurt My I watched this movie called You Hurt My Feelings recently, which has one of the worst therapists I've ever seen on screen, and he's supposed to be bad, in the context of the movie.
Okay.
And that's one of my icks, as it were, is when there's a bad therapist. And I thought that the episode 6 couples therapy was actually really well done in a variety of ways. But overall, one of the great things about this show is every episode is titled after a relationship milestone, and they find clever ways of kind of fitting the spy stuff into that structure. So for instance, episode 5 is called Do You Want Kids? And it involves them taking care of an older target played by Ron Perlman, who acts like a child during the course of the episode. And so it's this is what a couple goes through, except in the context of spy stuff. And I thought that was all very highly enjoyable. It's kind of one of those shows where you watch to see how they're gonna manage to fit in this relationship milestone into the construct of a spy mission. Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on that?
Well, and it doesn't feel formulaic or episodic, even though it is. It feels like it flows really naturally. I thought that was one of the things I found most interesting about the show and its broader narrative arc, is that it doesn't feel like a movie chopped up into 8 pieces. It is different moments in their lives, different contexts, different situations, but feels very naturally natural continuations of what we saw. But it's really elegant storytelling, I thought, to be able to blend these genres, these tones, these character moments in a way that I was always impressed by how natural the pieces click together, even though you can separate them out, but they click together really well in a way that doesn't feel forced. And the other bit that I really enjoyed, especially in the second half, is the show is not that loud in the sense that it is not an action heavy spy show with relationship stuff on the side. I think we characterize it more as a rom-com, kind of stuck in a box of a spy show. And when the show does choose to go loud, when it chooses to have an action scene, I thought the action was pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
And all the moments that it chooses to do it. There's a great chase scene in the episode that you're talking about. The entire finale is just full of really kick-ass action scenes, and it chooses its moments. But when it chooses to be hey, it doesn't skimp on the action, I guess is what I'd say. A different kind of show when it reveals itself to be heavily emphasizing the romance and the comedy, then you might be under the assumption that, okay, well, I guess when there is action, I'm not going to raise my expectations for it that high. And I'm not saying they're beating out a Mission Impossible movie, but it won't. I feel like the action goes punch for punch, sometimes quite literally, with like the comedy and the drama. It all feels very elevated, and it doesn't feel like the action is perfunctory to just be a like. I guess we got to get some shooting in here. It serves a not just as a functions for the plot, but is just genuinely fun, interesting action to watch as well. And I was very impressed by that when the show decided to delve in that direction.
One other thing I want to call out, Patrick Klepek, is all the guest stars are so well utilized in the show. And they're not playing characters that I would necessarily associate with them. Sarah Paulson playing the kind of oblivious therapist, Ron Perlman playing the basically like a doddering old man in this show, Michaela Cole being like a total badass assassin. Like, those are all like they do all those things really, really well, but they're not things that I'm just like I would automatically connect. So really creative casting, and every single uh sort of guest star is really well utilized. Even Paul Dano, who like you wonder kind of whether he has insidious motives, and he does, and it turns out to be that way in kind of some of the most funny ways possible, in the funniest way possible, I thought. So
and this sort of the creative casting doesn't overshadow the show, right? Like I think that was a little bit of my worry when I realized one of the tricks of the show was going to be, hey, pretty much every episode you can expect to find kind of a noteworthy, interesting actor here. Like that's part of what the show is doing. It's not trying to cast so that you're not really paying attention to the other actors that orbit our two main characters. They're okay with you, like, oh, I know that guy, like I know that girl. But I felt like that never ended up overshadowing like our main characters. They just ended up orbiting it really, really well. And so I thought that was just like a very elegant handling on the show's behalf, where you're like, oh, that's really neat that this person is here. But it doesn't end up revolving the show around them. It's just good actors doing good work.
Let's talk about the finale, Patrick Klepek. I thought the finale was pretty solid, pretty interesting. We get the return of the couple from the double date episode. We find out that their job is to assassinate other Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I mean, look, Patrick Klepek, I promised I would let go of any attachment to realism.
I knew it. There was a moment where I muttered to myself, oh my God, David is going to be... Can I guess which moment it was?
No. I was actually just going to say overall,
okay.
I had a much better time with these last 4 episodes because I fulfilled my promise, which is I decided to stop thinking about whether to take the show seriously and just let go and let it wash over me.
But the show breaks its own rules. Like,
okay, yeah.
So the moment I'm thinking of is in the finale when they're running outside. It's not long after the explosion occurs coming out of the revolving door. And they have to essentially they're hunting each other.
Yes.
But then also are like the police show up and they're like, what's going on here? And I found it easier to watch this entire show in which their actions are never reacted to by like normal law enforcement agencies. There's not like the FBI is not snooping around. Like the New York Police Department isn't knocking on their door like, we saw a picture of you at this. You know what I mean? Like it just dispenses all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they're going through that park and the police show up and we're supposed to, I couldn't buy into what I didn't find that tense at all. It's like show. You can't tell me to not care about any of this stuff and then try to derive tension from like 2 police officers bumbling their way to like chasing them. That part didn't really work for me, and I just assumed have them continue with the suspension of disbelief rather than it felt like reality sort of checking in on the show in a way that didn't really work for me.
I had already let go of any pretensions by that point, but I guess it's just like the whole... The show begins with what I assume is a Mr. and Mrs. Smith being dispatched. I don't think we ever like get an explicit explanation of what happened there. But it really feels like this is what happens to Mr. and Mrs. Smith's, like, in the long run, very likely. And it just you got to think, Patrick Klepek, maybe the people running the Mr. and Mrs. Smith spy organization might say, hey, if we put two hot people together, force them to play act being man and wife, and then give them hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe one day they're going to run away and not want to do this anymore. You know?
Mhm.
No, but no one thought that, apparently, or they did think it, and they're just like, rather than somehow fixing that before that happens, they dispatch a separate crew of Mr. and Mrs. Smiths to kill the first Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So it's like, if basically, Patrick Klepek, what I was going to say was, if I were bothered by it, that's one of the complaints I would bring up.
But in this,
But
in this
But
other
because I'm not
world,
bothered by it, I would dare not even mention it
that's
on the
very
podcast.
very kind of you.
You're
very
welcome.
very nice of you for me and for the show.
I would say the breakup episode, so that's season 1, episode 8, is like felt to me the closest to the actual Doug Liman movie with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie.
Mhm.
Like, it feels like very heavily inspired by that movie, where but it was like a creative take on it,
Yeah.
where they basically do the entire thing in their house. The stuff with the truth serum. I'm just really psyched that they committed to it, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna have like a 5-minute scene where they talk to each other on this truth serum, which I thought was really amazing. And then, of course, the reveal of who's coming after them. It wasn't actually them that shot each other, pointing to the fact that really, Patrick Klepek, the thing that would make most marriages better is communication. Like, that's really what the show is about.
I thought they did a decent job. We find in the truth serum moment where they admit that, like, I had a shot on you and I
Right.
missed. And I think they do a really great job actually staging that during the action sequences. Like, in particular, I'm thinking of a sequence where Jane is running up the stairs and John has a clear line of shot, and he sort of does like a half circle arc over her back. Like, there's no, like, you've spent this entire show showing us that they are not necessarily like world-ending assassins, but they're competent and like would have been able to take a shot that was right in front of them. But the action is so frenetic and the editing is like fast enough that it's kind of a blink and you miss it. But they do set up a number of times where you can kind of credibly see the two of them erring on the side of like not letting something connect. And I thought they handled that dance pretty well. Well, also, like, not, because if you go a step too far, there's zero tension to the action. And even though we know the show we're watching, I don't think it's going to end 30 minutes in with like a stray bullet getting caught in one of their heads and then cut to credits. So you sort of assume we're going to get to the end of the episode with both of them alive. But I thought they were able to ride that line pretty well, where even if I know where we're going to some degree, it was still kind of fun and thrilling to see how inventive the two of them got along the way.
Let's talk about the very ending, right? So before we get to that, just a quick shout out to the Paul Dano character again. Like, I just love that it's revealed that he's just amazed at their house, and that's why he's keeping track of them. And if you've ever had trouble buying the house of your dreams, Patrick Klepek, that has everything that you want, I think you can relate to what he's saying in that scene.
Well, in some ways, that character was the David character who, like, the show sets aside all of its logical inconsistencies and then gives it to a character to be like, none of this makes sense. And like, it's in the context of a real estate sale, but you could also view that as like the show,
it's being
winking
like,
to a certain degree to be like, come on, guys.
Like, this whole setup is technically impossible.
Right.
It doesn't. Right. Please explain it to me like I'm 5. Anyway, that's great. I hadn't thought about it that way, but the episode kind of comes to an end with, is it Parker Posey about to bust into their safe house, and Jane, they kind of declare their love for each other. They reveal what their names are, and then she's like, I'm going to bust out of here shooting. And then she gives a countdown. She's like, on the count of 3, I'm going to bust out of there. And she busts out, and then we don't see what happens.
I think we get 3, like, we get a shot of a window.
Yeah, window.
I think
and like
3 gunshots.
3 gunshots, right. And that's it. And it is left open-ended. What happens to them? We see Paul Dano go into the house afterwards, and he says, like, oh, there's no one here anymore. Maybe they're ready to sell. Any interpretation on any of that, Patrick Klepek? Any reaction to that?
In some ways, the team that worked on this, I'd love to see what they did. Like, I'd love to see them keep working together. I found the couple to be very charming, the actors very charming, but I also love how ambiguous it is at the end. Like, because it really kind of finishes telling its story, right? Like, it's these two people kind of come clean with one another, and then it ends. And it's very easy to imagine both scenarios of them having survived this encounter. But it also very easy to imagine the two of them, just slumped up against the wall, and somebody comes and clean those bodies later. So I actually thought the ending was really beautiful, and I loved the ambiguity. Even if that's convenient for giving them lots of outs for
Right.
whatever a second season, but it didn't feel it's the right kind of cliffhanger in which there are dangling threads, but it still feels like the story where there no second season. There's nothing about the end that feels unsatisfying. Like, oh, I can't believe they saved that for the second season. It really feels like they sort of closed the book on the questions asked by the characters by the end. And there's plenty that you can imagine them, kind of pulling at in a second season. But if we never got it, I think this is a really decent, complete work, which itself is a rarity in television shows these days.
Agreed. All right, Patrick Klepek, I have one thing to say about the show
Okay.
that is not positive.
Oh no.
And I fear, people have been enjoying hearing us chat about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and then now it got to end on this note.
Uh-huh.
But I think my biggest problem with the show is that I think it is an exceptionally well done genre exercise, and therefore a lot of fun. Happy to recommend it to people. You're gonna have a blast watching it. I don't know that the show is really about anything.
Mm.
And Roxana Haddadi, who is a previously co-host on Decoding TV, hopefully a future co-host as well. Love her work, both on the podcast and at vulture.com. She wrote a piece called Mr. and Mrs. Smith's Faux Love Story that I thought was really interesting, where basically she describes how she was initially hopeful that Mr. and Mrs. Smith would be a story about capitalism, and then it turns out to just kind of be a love story and not a particularly good love story in her estimation, as far as I can tell. I'm going to read from the article here. Quote, John and Jane's rapaciousness is their greatest and perhaps only harmonious quality, but it's the one Mr. and Mrs. Smith shies away from over and over again. This portrait of millennials as so hungry for stuff that they'll agree to do deplorable things for an employer they know nothing about is a tantalizingly barbed idea if Mr. and Mrs. Smith were willing to dig into it, end quote. And there's a lot about that thing, that her piece, that resonates with me, which is that, to me, I feel there is a kind of emptiness at the heart of the show, which is like, yes, it's fun, we had a good time, like, oh, and cool, like you kind of Tetris, these relationship milestones into like a spy thriller, but I don't really feel like I know that much about these characters, who they quote unquote really are, and beyond being a really creatively told love story, which is very big accomplishment. I don't know that it really says anything else about society, about modern love, about anything of that nature. So that's one disappointment I have with the show. But maybe there's thousands of people listening to this right now, screaming at their phones, saying they disagree that it's not about anything. Patrick Klepek, do you want to give voice to these disembodied voices shouting at me about my assessment on the show?
Well, I guess one way to respond would be, I don't really care that it didn't have anything to say about those things.
Sure. Yeah.
The moment I stepped foot into this show, I felt like it communicated enough about its ambitions that I was fine with the fact that it didn't go much deeper than that. What I will say, though, is it was interesting in splitting up the season the way we did. The second half of the season really spins its wheels with their arc. Like by the second half of the season, they're just bickering all the time. And at a certain point, there is a lacking of substance in the bickering, and we need to get to what the finale gets to, which is some sort of like this hits a tipping point and we achieve some resolution in the future of their relationship. But there are multiple episodes where they just don't like each other and they're just getting mad at each other. And I felt like the show was like, okay, we have these characters in this place, but we can't do anything about it until we get to the finale. And so even though it's not an especially long show, it's not even egregious about its hour runtimes. Frequently it was shorter than that, in the 45 minute
44
range.
minutes,
like, when I saw the finale was 65 minutes, it was like, okay, like great. Like this seems like the kind of show that it's only being that long when it's like, hey, we have something to justify the longer runtime. But I do feel, and maybe this is even leans credence to the criticism, which is when they ran out of the little bit of substance that the characters had, you could do nothing but start relying more on the action, the set pieces, the setups, and less on the substance between those characters. And I do think that is a notable criticism in the second half. The therapy episode betrays that to a certain degree, but I feel like that's an exception to what else is present in the back half storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that you have all the ingredients of making a Clash critique if you wanted to, right? Like of making this into something that's beyond just quote unquote just a love story. But I don't think the show ever gets there for a wide variety of reasons. You know, like I actually think one of the reasons the lack of realism bothered me is because uh, it's hard for me to take the show seriously if I don't have those grounding sense of the rules.
Mhm.
And it turns out I didn't really have to, because the show, in my opinion, is not ambitious, doesn't have ambitions beyond here's a really, creatively done love story, and that's it. And that is its own accomplishment. But it had the potential to be something that is, I think, much more thematically interesting, and it chooses not to take that path. And I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. So anyway, hate to end on that note, because I think we both really enjoyed the show overall and would recommend
Mhm.
it. But feel the need to mention that that's one thing I wish had been fleshed out a little bit more. Also, shout out to Michaela Cole, who I don't know. Did you see I May Destroy You, by the way, Patrick Klepek?
No.
That is, in my opinion, I May Destroy You, on which aired on, I think it's probably still on Max, the one to watch for HBO. She wrote and directed this miniseries called I May Destroy You.
Oh, okay. I'm looking it
Yeah.
up now. I remember seeing clips of this, but no, I never got around to it myself.
It's one of the most incredible pieces of art, I would say, that I have seen on television. And she wrote and directed it. She starred in it. She also appeared as the kind of uh, side piece / assassin in episode 7 of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But she's an enormously talented person, and it's just wonderful to see her in this show being a complete badass. So, and I would strongly recommend I May Destroy You. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.